Spoiler warning. The following discussion will contain spoilers. We recommend checking out the movie first, then coming back to hang with us. But if you don't care about that, glad to have you here. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Real Review. My name's Kevin.
And I'm John.
And we are The Real Movie Guys. On today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Back to the Future, Part 2. After visiting 2015, Marty McFly must repeat his visit to 1955 to prevent disastrous changes to 1985 without interfering with his first trip. So, John, I have a confession to make about Back to the Future Part 2.
Yeah? Let's hear it.
This was the first one I saw.
Whoa, really?
Yep, when I was a kid, and this is a true story. I'm not making this up for YouTube drama. This is just the way it was. When I was a kid, we had VHS back then for all you kids at home. So we only had VHS at home, and all we had was Back to the Future Part 2 for some reason. And I remember watching it, and I fell in love with this movie. Hands down. Like, I loved it. Everything from beginning to end. But I always wondered, what about Part 1 and Part 3? Because at that point, both of them were out. Both of them were available. So I go to my dad, and I ask him, Dad, why don't we have Back to the Future 1 or 3? And my dad, being the man he is, tells me, Kevin, there is no 1 or... There's only 2. There's only Back to the Future 2. There is no 1 or 3. So, me being me, goes, oh, okay, that makes sense. You know, being a little kid, what do I know, right? He's like, oh, they never made 3, and there was only Back to the Future Part 2.
They never made a 1.
Okay, that's kind of weird, but okay. Being the cheapskate that he was, he didn't want to buy the first one or the third one, so I lived a lot of my young life thinking there was only Back to the Future Part 2. Come to go to school when I was younger, and we're talking about Back to the Future, and I'm telling the kids, about this movie, and then they're talking about the other ones, and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? There's no other ones. Well, I was in for a rude awakening, and yes, eventually he did admit there were others, and I did eventually see the others. But yes, a young Kevin in his child life only thought there was a Back to the Future Part 2. And you know what? It kind of gets away with that in a lot of ways, this movie. This movie treads so much on the first one that you kind of don't need to really see the first movie to understand what's going on, in my opinion. This movie works in a lot of ways, and where a lot of sequels would fail, I think this movie actually succeeds in a lot of ways. It's like, don't get me wrong, like, you do need Back to the Future 1 in some context. You really should have Back to the Future 1 knowledge before watching this. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that. But, you know what, as far as just being enjoyable, I was able to enjoy this movie without knowing of the existence of the first one, and thinking they never made a third one, and that little teaser at the end was just like, whatever. But, again, there's just so much to really enjoy about this movie. And I don't want to be redundant. It's going to be hard when we're talking about this series. I actually take notes normally when I review a movie, and my notes actually just say, see the positives of the first movie, which is true. All that stuff carries over. All the actors are phenomenal, but I think there's a couple more things that this movie adds that the other ones don't. Let's jump into it. So one thing I want to talk about real quick is the concept of Part 2 and Part 3 being filmed together. Right after another. They were literally filmed together. That's why, like I spoke about earlier, at the end of Part 2, this movie, there's a sequence that shows Part 3. They actually have like footage of Part 3, then you knew it was coming. It came relatively soon. I don't even know, was it a year? It might not even have been a year. It was maybe just a year or a little shy of a year. The third one came out right after this. Even more interestingly, though, there wasn't supposed to be a sequel to the first movie. There's a gag at the end of the first movie where Doc Brown comes in a flying DeLorean.
Marty! You've got to come back with me. Where? Back to the future.
And he takes Marty and his girlfriend away, and you're like, oh, okay, where we're going, we don't need roads.
Hey, Doc, you better back up. We don't have enough road to get up to 88.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
And the car just flies up and jumps into the air. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, they're like, that was just a little joke, ha 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 ha. the studio came back and said, all right, well, we want sequels now. This movie did really, really well. You know, we want more. And they're like, oh, crap, I guess we got to live up to that. Hence how this movie's born and why we go to the actual future. And this movie nails it. It's kind of weird because this movie takes place in the not-so-distant future of 2015. But it's kind of weird how they nailed some things in some regard. Right? Like their interpretation of the future based on when this came out in 1989, they kind of got some stuff close or semi-right. You know, we're working on some of the things that are in this movie.
The future.
They brought a lot of like cool, like futuristic things, like when he goes into the restaurant and he's
the Cafe
ordering
80s, right? The retro restaurant.
Welcome to the Cafe 80s, where it's always morning in America, even in the afternoon.
Yeah,
That's like a common thing nowadays. Like people love retro style restaurants and theme style restaurants. Like that wasn't too uncommon, I would say.
no, and they
They
have
kind of
like
got that right.
they have the arcade machine. They have the arcade game there.
I mean, like, oh, this is old, and like kids are used to playing in virtual reality. We got virtual reality now.
I'll show you, kid. I'm a crack shot at this.
You mean you have to use your hands? That's like a baby's toy.
Baby's toy.
It's crazy when you really sit down and look at like what they captured. I mean, hoverboards we didn't perfect necessarily yet.
Little girl, stop. Look, I need to borrow your hoverboard.
We're working on that, but that's something, right? For sure.
But also, when you think about it too, they're starting to get rid of people working at like restaurants and other places where they're having robots do these kind of things, where they're so close to it, but yet so far. But in this, it shows it like done very well.
Hey, wait, guys, hey. All I want is a Pepsi.
And there's just so many iconic like pieces of future tech in this movie. The hoverboard inspired a generation, in my opinion. There's people that absolutely love that hoverboard. I actually have a replica of that hoverboard.
He's on a hoverboard!
Absolutely love it. I mean, that thing, as stupid as it is and as brightly colored, people thought that was real. I think there was an instance where they filmed like a trailer for the toy and people thought that was really coming out. It was fake. It was just like a promotional thing, but people thought the hoverboard was really coming out. And then when people found out it wasn't, you know, they were pretty let down by that. That was a big thing. Like we talked about how like the first one inspired a generation. I wonder if this one had maybe even some more influence in some ways, because the self-lacing sneakers.
Our laces, all right.
They actually have those. Those are real. You can buy those now. They did like an anniversary line where you can actually go and buy those shoes.
Really?
Yeah, you can buy the jacket. They sell like the replica jacket.
This thing doesn't fit.
I'm adjusting. Fit.
It's weird that a lot of people really love Back to the Future too. I don't know if they had the same experience I did. I would think not. But at the same time, there's just so much about this movie that works. And part of that, I wonder too, is this movie's a little darker than the first one. Wouldn't you say? This one goes into like a little more post-apocalyptic, you know, a storyline here where, you know, in the first movie, it was just a light time travel story of Marty going back in time, seeing what his parents were like, and then making them better people as he tries to get back to his own time. And this one, it gets a little weird, right? It starts off, Marty has to go back in time because his doc says, your kids, Marty, we got to do something about your kids.
What happens to us in the future? What, do we become assholes or something?
Oh, no. You and Jennifer both turn out fine. It's your kids, Marty. Something's got to be done about your kids.
his son's about to get into a bad situation. So Marty goes back, he stops that. And before they go back, he grabs a sports almanac where he's like, oh, why can't I make some money and, change my life around? And then Doc goes, I didn't make the time machine for financial gain.
What's this?
It's a souvenir.
50
book.
years of sports statistics. Hardly recreational reading material, Marty.
Well, hey, Doc, and what's the harm in bringing back a little info on the future? Maybe we could place a couple bets.
Marty, I didn't invent the time machine for financial gain. The intent here is to gain a clear perception of humanity. Where we've been, where we're going, the pitfalls and the possibilities, the perils and the promise. Perhaps even an answer to that universal question. Why?
Hey, Doc, I'm all for that. What's wrong with making a few bucks on the side?
And we get into the whole Biff stealing the sports almanac and going back to the time, give it to himself so he can become rich and changing the future as we know it.
All right, Pops, what's the gag? How did you know what the score was going to be?
I told you, it's in this book. All you gotta do is bet on the winner and you'll never lose.
That's a little different, right? It's interesting to see that they went in that direction. I actually kind of like how he moved away from maybe just the family aspect, where it does affect his family, don't get me wrong, but also it talked about like the problem of time travel, right? How it could be used maliciously. And I think that's kind of interesting.
You notice too, when they're first going back in time and he's with his girlfriend and Doc are all in the car and she's like, oh, we're going to go visit our future self. Are we rich? Do we have a huge house?
What? We can actually see our future. Doc, now you said we were married, right? Yeah? Was it a big wedding? Marty, we're going to be able to see our wedding.
Wow.
I'm going to be able to see my wedding dress.
Wow.
Yeah, the Doc doesn't answer the question.
I wonder where we live. I bet it's a big house with lots of kids. And how many kids?
Doc, what the hell are you doing?
Relax, Marty. It's just a sleep-inducing alpha rhythm generator. She was asking too many questions and no one should know too much about their future.
And Doc is like, I don't want to tell you this stuff. And then you like see how his future self is and like, you always picture your future self as different than what it's going to be.
You never know what your future holds. And that becomes the theme, I think, is that your future isn't determined, that you determine your future and your actions determine that. And I think that's a strong theme, and that it gets a little heavy-handed, I think, towards the third one. It really gets like, okay, calm down a little bit with the theme there. But I think it's important to know that. And I think that's a really good like family film concept, is that you determine your future by your actions.
Yeah, and also too, like what you're saying with like the sports almanac.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard so many times people say like, not only do people go after like a game is done, they're always like, oh yeah, well I knew that was gonna happen, and this person says, oh well I knew this was gonna happen, and blah blah blah. Everybody would like to know in the future what's going to happen in these certain situations.
Well, it's funny because the whole scene that develops around that is the guy, they're trying to save the clock tower when he's in 2015, and he goes up to him and the Cubs are in the World Series. He's like, oh, I wish I could go back in time and put some money on the Cubs.
Wait a minute. Cubs win World Series against Miami?
Yeah, it's something, huh? Who would have thought? 100 to 1 shot. I wish I could go back to the beginning of the season, put some money on the Cubs.
I just meant Miami. What did you just say?
Kind of wish I could have, because I think that would have been a good year to do that, because the Cubs actually, speaking of things this movie got right, which is really weird in hindsight, is the Cubs did enter the World Series that year, which is very strange. That's a very strange thing to happen.
Very interesting.
How tempting is that, right? Like, all of us at some point wish we could go back in time and just change something or make a slight change to make our lives, how we perceive is better. And this movie just does that excellently. And how it does that too is its world building overall, in my opinion. There's so many sets, and I think it's good. It's good in a lot of ways. Some people can argue that, but I do like how it jumps around more. In the first one, we were kind of stuck in 1985. We were just stuck in that year, and that's kind of where we were, and we were just trying to get out of that. I like how this movie is a little more fast and loose with its time travel. Like, we're jumping around to all these different time periods with different realities that are occurring. And I think it's all the better for it. I think that makes it a slightly more exciting time travel movie. Not so much a story of character development, but I think as far as a time travel movie, I think it's a little more exciting in that regard.
Yeah, it's totally more exciting. I feel like it also jumps around so much more. Like it's
And it
almost, I
world
would say,
builds.
more exciting. Like too,
Right, and
in
it's
ways.
exciting. It's. I think it's more exciting. I mean, you get to see they build so many different worlds, even though we don't get to spend a lot of time, arguably, in each one, and it does default back to an original one. It still has enough in it for me that makes me excited. Like when we see like the alternate Biff future, which you could argue is comparative to a certain political character in our current timeline.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Biff Tannen Museum, dedicated to Hill Valley's #1 citizen and America's greatest living folk hero, the one and only Biff Tannen.
Which people have made that argument, and, you know, to each your own, I guess, at this point. But you can see the comparisons there, I think. But it's like post-apocalyptic. They have the giant Biff Tower and the motorbikers in the street and the shit he's got on the sambles. Would it be that crazy?
It's gotta be the wrong year.
I don't know, but at the same time, it's fun, right? It's having fun with its concept, even if it is stretching it out a little bit crazy. I think it's a lot of fun. And the future setting, we talked about even earlier, is just a completely amazing setting. Just, you know, very imaginative, the floating cars, flying cars, the technology, everything's still within, even though it's a little fantastic, it's still within the realm of possibility, in my opinion.
Shark still looks fake.
Well, yeah, even with that, like, whole Biff having that casino and everything, I feel like it does show a lot of logic, too, because a lot of times where you see it, like, where casinos are,
right,
outside of the casino is, like,
yeah,
horror and stuff, and not so great.
Come visit New Jersey, guys. We got Atlantic City. Trust me, it ain't so far off.
You son of a...
So what I want to go into now is I want to talk a little bit about the actors. Everyone's excellent again. If you saw our first review, and if you haven't, I recommend it. Please do. Everyone's back in full form in this movie. And I would argue maybe a little bit better in some circumstances, because I mentioned it in the first review where we talked about people playing dual roles. We had Crispin Glover, who's actually not in this movie. Apparently there was a fallout with money and he didn't want to come back. And, you know, Crispin Glover kind of went weird after Back to the Future. I don't know what happened. He's showed up in movies after that, don't get me wrong, but his like take on Hollywood and what he does and doesn't want to do, it's kind of strange and not really for me. I do love Crispin Glover. You go into more the actors playing multiple roles, and I think it actually like shows they have a little more acting to them than you would think, especially Michael J. Fox. Has to play several different characters in this movie. He plays himself. He plays his future son.
Have you made a decision about tonight's opportunity?
Yeah, Griff. You know, I was thinking about it. I'm not sure because I just think, you know, it might be a little bit dangerous. So.
Plays his future daughter, which that's nightmare fuel in some regard.
Mom, is that you?
Even though he looks like a woman. Right? He doesn't look so bad. You know, I can see it.
Dad, telephone, it's Needles.
Dad, it's for you.
He plays his future self.
That's right. He's home. Dad's home.
Lord of the manor.
Hello.
King of the castle.
Hello. What the hell is this?
Lithium mode on.
It's better. Damn kids.
He plays the old Marty, and all those characters are done really well. I mean, the makeup is done pretty well for him playing his daughter and him playing himself, even though it does look a little off at times here and there, just because, I don't know if that's age or just because we've become such a high resolution. I watched this movie in 4K Ultra HD, so I don't know, sometimes I wonder if the Ultra HD format isn't the greatest format on occasion with these older movies. I digress. He still looks good, and you know, he plays off all these roles. Even though we don't spend a lot of time with the future roles, I think he did a really good job with it, and we got to see another side to him.
Here you go.
Oh boy, Mom. You sure can hydrate a pizza. No, I'm sorry. I missed that whole thing.
Elizabeth Shue actually comes into this movie. She replaces Jennifer. She was another actor that didn't return for this movie. Jennifer in the first movie, she didn't really do much for me. You know, I mean, she wasn't really in it that much, so you could argue that her character was just kind of like there, right? I think overall, for the most part. I like Elizabeth Shue a lot. I liked her in Karate Kid, and she's actually in the most recent Cobra Kai series. She actually made a little comeback there, which I thought was fun. I like her Jennifer. I think she did a good job. She got to play her future self as well. They had a fun interaction where they're like, the one's like, I'm old, I'm young, and then they pass out.
Come home, Jennifer.
Lost my job. I'll get out of town. Look, everything's
I thought that was really fun and exciting. And we have to give it to, again, another actor. I don't even know if he really gets enough credit, but Thomas F. Wilson as Biff, once again, in my opinion, steals the show as old Biff.
Hey, kid, say hello to your grandma for me.
Evil corporate Biff, I guess that's what they're going for.
Oh my God, it's your father.
my father.
You're supposed to be in Switzerland, you little son of a bitch!
My father.
And then as Griff, his future grandson. He nails it, man. Something about him, like, he just understands the Biff character. Like, they all feel like they're connected, right, in every single way. And I love how he plays old Biff. I think it's like one of my favorite characters. He's got the cane with the little fist on the end, and he's knocking on Marty's head. Hello, anybody home? Think, McFly, think. He can't do it with his hands, so he's got a little fist at the end of his cane.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home? What do you think? Griff just calls me Grandpa for his health?
He's Griff.
Gramps! What the hell am I paying you for?
And just his overall grumpiness. I think he just knocks it out of the park.
Why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?
It's leave, you idiot. Make like a tree and leave. You sound like a damn fool when you say it wrong.
All right, then leave and take your book with you.
You don't really get to see any other sides to his character per se, but you get to see just that evolution of evil and meanness. And then when we get to the present timeline, when they come back, we get to see all nice, like, oh no, he's got the car buffing business Biff, where he's all happy and, you know, subservient to the McFly family, which I think is a fun contrast as well.
Hey, Marty! Marty! Marty, I wanted to show you these new matchbooks for my auto detailing I had printed up.
Like DeLorean?
This movie does a lot of things too, which we're going to see a lot of this in the next film as well, is this movie does a lot of circling back, right? Like they recycle a lot of the same gags.
Yes!
Now, how do you feel about that, John? How does that impress upon you, circling back? Because they do it quite a lot, I think, especially in this movie and the next one. More so in this movie, I would argue. They circle a lot back to the first film.
See, it doesn't bother me that much in this. In other things, it does bother me a lot, but in this, I feel like there's almost reasons for them doing it. Like, I feel like other things do it just to have more content in it, and this is more like kind of just helping.
Right, it's interesting. They do it a lot, and some examples I'll give is they have the whole bully chase.
All right, Spunk! Hey, look!
Right, they circle literally back to having another bully chase, having the same confrontation. Marty waking up to see his mother, and that not being the mother or the person he thinks, not being his mother that he thinks it is.
Well, you're safe and sound now. Back on the good old 27th floor.
27th floor! Mom? Mom, that can't be you.
Oh, yes, it's me, Marty. Are you all right?
I'm fine. It's just that you're so big.
Among others. There's a lot. There's a lot of circling back in this film. Now, does that hinder the movie? I don't think so. I think it has a lot to do with what time travel is, if you want to maybe get onto it on like a deeper perspective. Time travel in itself is circular, right? You're going back in time and you're traveling the timeline. When some things tend to repeat itself, I could see the movie getting away with that excuse. They are repeated, there's no doubt about that, but I never felt they were forced. And it's kind of like you said, in some movies, sometimes it feels like they're forcing a gag. Home Alone's a good example, which we covered on the channel, where we went to Home Alone 2, and sometimes some of the gags felt forced at times. Not that they're bad necessarily, but it kind of felt like it was just shoehorned into the story. But in this movie, it comes across more natural and charming, I would say. And like I said, especially the bully scene, I think is fantastic. I really like that scene. And it's something I look forward to whenever Marty has to confront, the Biff of that timeline, which he does in the third one as well. But it's something I look forward to, that confrontation. My favorite scene in this movie has to be the explanation of time travel from Doc Brown. There's a scene after they figure out what's going on where the future's been altered, and Doc takes Marty back to his place, and he has a chalkboard, and he draws a straight line, and he essentially explains what time travel is. Now, while that scene doesn't seem to be the most exciting thing in the world, it's funny because that's an actual theory of time travel.
Imagine that this line represents time. Here's the present, 1985, the future, and the past. Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate to you, me, and Einstein, but reality for everyone else.
There's scholars out there that actually believe that is an explanation of time travel of what would happen, where if you change a certain event, it would diverge into another timeline and create this whole crazy catastrophic events. And I just think that's really cool. Like, to see a family sci-fi movie have an actual like theory that's plausible for time travel. I think that's a really cool idea that they actually incorporated a real theory of time travel into the film.
I thought that was really interesting too, that they put that into this film.
Well, we talked about the movie repeating gags. There's something else that repeats in this movie. And John, I'm going to ask your opinion on this too. How do you feel about the recycled footage from the first movie?
Anything at all.
Yeah, I'd like to have that in writing.
Yeah, me too.
Marty, why are you so nervous?
Because this movie, it's interesting where we were in the future, and then we're in the like dystopian future or dystopian present, and then we go back to the events of the first film. How do you feel about that overall? Do you like that they did that they went back and referenced the first one? Do you think they should have did something different? And the fact that they recycled a lot of that footage, too, how do you feel about that?
I don't think it was a bad thing. It's not like one of my favorite things, but I feel like you can understand why they do it in this.
It's almost like budget saving. I don't know if it is. It probably isn't. I don't know. That's mean to say, but their creative process, I think it kind of worked. And there's a line it's kind of throwaway, but it made me chuckle a little bit, is when Doc Brown, they talk about the year 1985, and he's like, oh, that point in 1985, that must have something to do with the space-time continuum of it affects the future. It's some kind of strange reality point where whatever happens in that year affects everything that comes down after it.
That's right, Doc. November 12th, 1955.
Unbelievable that old Biff could have chosen that particular date. It could mean that point in time inherently contains some sort of cosmic significance, almost as if it were the temporal junction point for the entire space-time continuum. On the other hand, it could just be an amazing coincidence.
I thought that was kind of funny. Like they kind of like reference like, oh, we got to go back to that same point in time again. Because for some reason in the timeline, it's incredibly important to the universe. But not even that. I think it's okay. I kind of actually like it in some weird ways where we see footage from the past. Right. We lived through that. And that's where we were talked about earlier, not having to see the first one. If you saw the first film, it adds that a lot of that context to it. You get to see it from another perspective.
Johnny be good.
Like, while they recycle some of it, they do refilm a few things here and there, like Crispin Glover punching out Biff. Like, they refilm that from some context, and we get to see, like, what happened to Biff after.
Yeah, great. I had a feeling about you, too.
Feeling too.
Hey, butthead! Marty, you think that stupid disguise would get by me? Let's have it out. You and me, right now.
Right, because we never see him again in the movie, and this one we kind of get to see like what he was up to after. I like that. I think that's really cool. I like when you can see like another perspective. I think that's interesting, and I think that's really unique. So the only thing that's negative about this movie, which I don't know, I mean, I guess I'm on the fence more about it, and it's something I think we should talk about, is we finally get Marty having a short temper and him being called a chicken.
What's wrong, McFly? Chicken?
What did you call me, Griff?
Chicken! McFly!
Nobody calls me chicken.
And this becomes an ongoing thread between this movie and the third movie. I think the real reason it bothers me in some way is it's never present in the first movie. I feel like it was kind of like a character trait that was developed almost out of nowhere.
Your father's biggest problem, Marlene, is that he loses all self-control when someone calls him chicken. How many times have we heard it, George? Mom, I can't let him think I'm chicken.
You're right. Well, you're right.
About 30 years ago, your father tried to prove he wasn't chicken, and he ended up in an automobile accident.
Oh, you mean with the Rolls Royce?
Automobile accident.
Because in the first movie, there was never an instance where I could see him being like a hothead or being someone who can't deal with the situation. It almost just feels like thrown out of left field in some ways to me. Is it the worst thing in the world? No, because it does tie into this. I understand they needed something else for Marty besides just being like the hero character. He needed to have some kind of character flaw. So I understand why it's introduced. I think it's a little sloppy because, again, it's hard because I don't want to totally knock it because they didn't know they were getting a sequel, right? So they had to do something. Maybe they could have just done it a little, like eased it in a little more, but otherwise it just becomes this like big thing. Like, oh, Marty's got this hot temper. You know, he can't control himself when someone calls him chicken, or if he gets called out on something, he can't control himself. It feels a little shoehorned in, but I get why it's there. So I think we're at that point where we're going to give our final scores. I'm going to give Back to the Future Part 2 an A+.
I went to a rejuvenation clinic and got a whole natural overhaul. They took out some wrinkles, did a hair repair, change of blood, added a good 30 to 40 years to my life. They also replaced my spleen and colon. What do you think?
You look great, Doc.
Now, I find myself, this is a very rare situation, in my opinion, where I would argue, and I don't know who would agrees with me, I don't think it's just personal taste. I think genuinely, in my opinion, this one is as good as the first movie. And not a lot of movies can say that have a sequel, right? Not a lot of I'm actually having a hard time, honestly, thinking of like sequels that are as good as the first one. Maybe Star Wars. That's another conversation. But again, I think this movie's fantastic. It added more. It developed more of the time travel storyline. I had just the amount of fun as I did in the first movie, even if it's a little darker, which I enjoyed. Even as a kid, I enjoyed, the little dark times of it. I think the plot is just breakneck pace. It keeps moving. I never felt bored. And it sets up a third one. And it does it relatively well. It carries the spirit of Back to the Future in such a great way that I can't recommend it enough. John, where do you stand with this film?
I give this film another A+.
All right.
Nobody calls me chicken.
It's as good as the first one, and it's got so much of the same stuff that the first one had, and added in a whole bunch of other things that I really liked and enjoyed.
Right.
Especially with the future and everything, and how they did it so well.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do it tasteless, or I feel like they didn't sell out for this movie. It wasn't like, hey, we're doing another one, let's just make it crap. They actually tried for this one, and I felt that was good.
Right. It never feels too disjointed at any point. Like, you feel like it was a natural transition from 1 to 2. Like, I never felt like why is this happening? Or, is it necessary? You could argue it's not necessary. 1 stands perfectly well on its own, and that could just have been the end of the series. But this was like a good thing in a lot of ways. I feel like, again, this is a very rare thing to say. Like, I was really happy we got a sequel to this. Does it recycle a lot from the first one? Yes. an incredible amount. A lot of the gags carry over, but it's always so charming, and the reuse of footage never bothered me because it makes sense in the concept that they were going for. Back to the Future can stand on its own right as a strong movie, and I think it's something to be acknowledged. You know, we don't get many sequels that really hold up to the legacy of the first film, and Back to the Future 2, Back to the Future Part 2, amazing film. All right, John, where can the people find us at home?
You could find us on YouTube at the Real Movie Guys on YouTube. Like our channel, subscribe. Tell us how you felt about this one. Do you like this one better than the first one, or do you like the first one better?
Yeah.
You can also find us over on Twitter at The Real Movie Guy on Twitter. We're also now over on Instagram at The Real Movie Guys on Instagram and Facebook. So you can follow us there. You can also listen to us on many podcasting platforms such as...
Yes, for your listening pleasure, we are also available in podcast form at iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcast, Overcast, Breaker, Radio Public, and Pocket Casts. Be sure to give us a listen at any of those fine places. If you already are right now, hey, greatly appreciate it. Just search out Real Movie Guys. We should pop right up. Thank you again all so much for joining us for this episode of The Real Review. My name's Kevin. That guy over there, he's John. We are your Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. Don't forget, the future is real. We'll catch you next time.
We're going back, Marty.